Robert Laurence Binyon, CH, was an English poet, dramatist and art scholar. His most famous work, For the Fallen, is well known for being used in Remembrance Sunday services. Pre-war life. Laurence Binyon was born in Lancaster, Lancashire, England. His parents were Frederick Binyon and Mary Dockwray. Mary's father, Robert Benson Dockwray, was the main engineer of the London and Birmingham Railway. The family were Quakers. Binyon studied at St Paul's School, London. Then he read classics at Trinity College, Oxford, where he won the Newdigate Prize for Poetry in 1891. Immediately after graduating in 1893, Binyon started working for the Department of Printed Books of the British Museum, writing catalogues for the museum and art monographs for himself. In 1895 his first book, Dutch Etchers of the 17th Century, was published. In that same year, Binyon moved into the museum's Department of Prints and Drawings, under Campbell Dodgson. In 1909, Binyon became its assistant keeper, and in 1913 he was made the keeper of the new sub-department of Oriental Prints and Drawings. Around this time he played a crucial role in the formation of modernism in London by introducing young Imagist poets such as Ezra Pound, Richard Aldington and H.D. to East Asian visual art and literature. Many of Binyon's books produced while at the museum were influenced by his own sensibilities as a poet, although some are works of plain scholarship, such as his 4-volume catalogue of all the museum's English drawings, and his seminal catalogue of Chinese and Japanese prints. In 1904 he married historian Cicely Margaret Powell, and the couple had 3 daughters. During those years, Binyon belonged to a circle of artists, as a regular patron of the Wiener Café of London. His fellow intellectuals there were Ezra Pound, Sir William Rothenstein, Walter Sickert, Charles Ricketts, Lucien Pissarro and Edmund Dulac. Binyon's reputation before the war was such that, on the death of the poet laureate Alfred Austin in 1913, Binyon was among the names mentioned in the press as his likely successor. For the Fallen, moved by the opening of the Great War and the already high number of casualties of the British Expeditionary Force, in 1914 Laurence Binyon wrote his For the Fallen, with its ode of remembrance, as he was visiting the cliffs on the North Cornwall coast, either at Polzeath or at Portreath. The piece was published by the Times newspaper in September, when public feeling was affected by the recent Battle of Marne. Today Binyon's most famous poem, For the Fallen, is often recited at Remembrance Sunday services in the UK, as an integral part of Anzac Day services in Australia and New Zealand and of 11 November Remembrance Day services in Canada. The third and fourth verses of the poem have thus been claimed as a tribute to all casualties of war, regardless of nation. They went with songs to the battle, they were young, straight of limb, true of eyes, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with the faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. They mingle not with their laughing comrades again. They sit no more at familiar tables of home. They have no lot in our labour of the daytime. They sleep beyond England's foam. 3 of Binyon's poems, including For the Fallen, were set by Sir Edward Elgar in his last major orchestra choral work, The Spirit of England. In 1915, despite being too old to enlist in the First World War, Laurence Binyon volunteered at a British hospital for French soldiers, Hôpital Temporaire d'Arc-en-Barrois, at Marne, France, working briefly as a hospital orderly. He returned in the summer of 1916 and took care of soldiers taken in from the Verdun battlefield. He wrote about his experiences in Verdun Dauntless France, and his poems, Fetching the Wounded and The Distant Guns, were inspired by his hospital service in Arkansas. Artist's Rifles, a CD audio book published in 2004, includes a reading of For the Fallen by Binyon himself. The recording itself is undated and appeared on a 78 revolutions per minute disc issued in Japan. Other Great War poets heard on the CD include Siegfried Sassoon, Edmund Blunden, Robert Graves, David Jones, and Egil Rickword. Post-war life. After the war, he returned to the British Museum and wrote numerous books on art, in particular on William Blake, Persian art, and Japanese art. His work on ancient Japanese and Chinese cultures offered strongly contextualized examples that inspired, among others, the poets Ezra Pound and W. B. Yeats. His work on Blake and his followers kept alive the then nearly forgotten memory of the work of Samuel Palmer. Binyon's duality of interests continued the traditional interest of British visionary romanticism in the rich strangeness of Mediterranean and Oriental cultures. In 1931, his two-volume collected poems appeared. In 1932, Binyon rose to be the keeper of the prints and drawings department, yet in 1933 he retired from the British Museum. He went to live in the country at Westridge Green, near Streatley. He continued writing poetry. In 1933–1934, Binyon was appointed Norton Professor of Poetry at Harvard University. He delivered a series of lectures on the spirit of man in Asian art, which were published in 1935. Binyon continued his academic work. In May 1939 he gave the prestigious Romanes Lecture in Oxford on Art and Freedom, and in 1940 he was appointed the Byron Professor of English Literature at University of Athens. He worked there until forced to leave, narrowly escaping the German invasion of Greece in April 1941. He was succeeded by Lord Dunsany, who held the chair in 1941. Binyon had been friends with Ezra Pound since around 1909, and in the 1930s the two became especially close. Pound affectionately called him Bin and assisted Binyon with his translation of Dante. Another protégé was Arthur Waley, whom Binyon employed at the British Museum. Between 1933 and 1943, Binyon published his acclaimed translation of Dante's Divine Comedy in an English version of Terza Rima, made with some editorial assistance by Ezra Pound. Its readership was dramatically increased when Paolo Milano selected it for the Portable Dante in Viking's Portable Library series. Binyon significantly revised his translation of all three parts for the project, and the volume went through 3 major editions and 8 printings before being replaced by the Mark Musa translation in 1981. At his death he was also working on a major 3-part Arthurian trilogy, the first part of which was published after his death as The Madness of Merlin. He died in Dunedin Nursing Home, Bath Road, Reading, on the 10th of March 1943 after an operation. A funeral service was held at Trinity College Chapel, Oxford, on the 13th of March 1943. There is a slate memorial in St. Mary's Church, Aldworth, where Binyon's ashes were scattered. On the 11th of November 1985, Binyon was among 16 Great War poets commemorated on a slate stone unveiled in Westminster Abbey's Poets' Corner. The inscription on the stone quotes a fellow Great War poet, Wilfred Owen. It reads, "My subject is war, and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity." Daughters. His 3 daughters Helen, Margaret and Nicolette became artists. Helen Binyon studied with Paul Nash and Eric Ravillius, illustrating many books for the Oxford University Press, and was also a marionettist. She later taught puppetry and published Puppetry Today and Professional Puppetry in England. Margaret Binyon wrote children's books, which were illustrated by Helen Nicolette, as Nicolette Gray was a distinguished calligrapher and art scholar. Bibliography of key works: Poems and Verse, Lyric Poems, Porphyrion and Other Poems, Odes, Death of Adam and Other Poems, London Visions, England and Other Poems, The Fallen, The Times, the 21st of September 1914, Winnowing Fan, The Anvil, The Cause, The New World Poems, The Idols, Collected Poems Volume 1, London Visions, Narrative Poems, Translations, Collected Poems Volume 2, Lyrical Poems, The North Star and Other Poems, The Burning of the Leaves and Other Poems, The Madness of Merlin. In 1915, Cyril Rhythm set for The Fallen for chorus and orchestra, first performed in 1919 by the Cambridge University Musical Society, conducted by the composer Edward L. Garset, to music 3 of Binyon's poems as The Spirit of England, Op. 80, for tenor, soprano, solo, chorus and orchestra. English Arts and Myth, Dutch Etchers of the 17th Century, Binyon's first book on painting. John Crone and John Selcott Min. William Blake, being all his woodcuts photographically reproduced in facsimile. English Poetry in its relation to painting and the other arts. Drawings and engravings of William Blake. Arthur, a Tragedy. The Followers of William Blake. The engraved designs of William Blake. Landscape in English Art and Poetry. English Watercolors. Gerard Hopkins and His Influence. Art and Freedom. Oxford, The Clarendon Press. Japanese and Persian Arts, Painting in the Far East. Japanese Art. Flight of the Dragon. The Court Painters of the Had Mughals. Japanese Color Prints. The Poems of Nizami. Persian Miniature Painting. The Spirit of Man in Asian Art. Autobiography for Dauntless France. Biography Botticelli. Akbar. Stage plays. Brief Candles, a verse drama about the decision of Richard III to dispatch his 2 nephews, Paris and Enon, 1906. Godstone Nunnery. Play. Boadicea, a play in 8 scenes. Attila, a tragedy in 4 acts. Eulalie, a play in 3 acts and an epilogue. Sophro the Wise, a play for children. Charles Villiers Stanford wrote incidental music for Attila in 1907.